last couple of years, we've had lots of attention and focus on what is taking place in our criminal justice system, dealing with police abuse, dealing with the jobs of district attorneys that is happening all across the country. We've seen cases in Cleveland, Cincinnati, Brooklyn as well, of course, also in Baltimore with Freddie Gray, Laquan McDonald in Chicago. It has focused the attention for so many different people on really the role of a DA, the role of police, and also how do we proceed in this country to having a fair criminal justice system? Well, my next guest is someone who understands that. She is the state's attorney for Baltimore City at 36. She is the youngest top prosecutor of any major city in America, of course, gaining national attention a year ago when she announced she would prosecute 6 cops for the death of Freddie Gray in Baltimore. Now, we cannot talk specifically about that case because the judge has issued a gag order, so that's one of the reasons why we can't talk about that. But we will talk about a number of different issues dealing with criminal justice, the role of a DA, and also what can a district attorney do to combat crime and also to work smarter, not harder for reforming our criminal justice system. We welcome to News One Now for this exclusive interview, Marilyn Mosby. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
All right, glad to have you here. And so I talked about at the outset there, this very difficult role that a DA has in terms of representing the interest of citizens when it comes to prosecuting folks, but also trying to balance that when it comes to typically folks say, well, DA is on the side of law enforcement. How do you balance that when you have these contentious times, but everybody is focusing on the role of a DA and saying, look, do this or do this?
Well, I think it's simple. At the end of the day, the reason why I became a prosecutor is because the mission of a prosecutor is to seek justice over convictions. And that means pursuing justice on behalf of victims and witnesses in crimes, justice on behalf of defendants. And we can all see that the prosecutorial discretion has a lot of consequences, collateral consequences on our communities. So it's about applying justice fairly and equally, regardless of your sex, your occupation, your religion, and that's something that I take very seriously.
Now, obviously, we can't specifically talk about the Freddie Gray case, but we did see a situation where you have police officers who were angry with you because you chose to prosecute. We've seen the exact same thing in New York with Ken Thompson in Brooklyn, where they prosecuted Peter Leong, same thing in Cincinnati. And so how do you make it clear to the public and also the police that, look, the law is the law, and if the evidence says that there's wrongdoing, you pursue it, as opposed to say, well, if you're a law enforcement officer, you get a pass versus a regular citizen?
Well, I mean, I think it's a cultural shift. I think that when you see what's happening in Baltimore City, you see that you're applying justice fairly and equally to everybody. And, you know, we've tried to work with the police department. We've tried to apply justice fairly to the worst of the worst. You break the law, you're going to be held accountable for it. It's about accountability. And so that's something that we're really trying to focus on, and I think that that message has been resonating, especially in Baltimore City.
You just mentioned culture shift, and we are hearing that across the country. We saw the Department of Justice with their agreement with the city of Ferguson. We see in Cleveland where the DOJ is involved as well. No city, frankly, wants the federal government coming in and having to take over a police department or to examine those practices. But as a DA, what national discussion should be taking place when it comes to changing the culture? Because historically, it has been pretty much, look, DA walking lockstep with police officers, throw folks in jail, that's the answer.
Oh, for far too long, we've seen the result of this mass incarceration. It's had a disproportionate impact on communities of color, and it's about utilizing that discretion, which is an awesome amount of discretion, to be able to attack this system holistically. So it's not just about being tough on crime anymore. We have to start being smart on crime. I can tell you that in the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office, we have several initiatives where we have to start to break down those barriers of distrust in our communities. We have to be able to, when it comes to law enforcement in our communities, we also have to be able to hold the worst of the worst, the violent repeat offenders that are wreaking havoc in our communities accountable, so that communities feel safe, and that's what we're attempting to do. I think that, you know, when I took office, my top priority was to break down those barriers. So we created a community affairs division where we focus on crime control and prevention, community engagement, and victim witness services in the home of the Stop Snitching campaign, where the Stop Snitching started in Baltimore. So we're better protecting victims and witnesses, and we're making sure that we're getting to our young people before they actually get to the criminal justice system.
You mentioned Smarter on Crime. Kamala Harris, who was the DA in San Francisco, now is the State Attorney General, has often talked about that, even authored a book on that. And that is a new concept, if you will, from the typical law and order role of a DA, that when you've had elections of a DA running, they've always touted the number of people they've thrown in jail, number of folks they've locked up, number of folks who've gotten the death penalty.
Well, that's not the mission of a prosecutor, and Kamala Harris is somebody who I admire greatly. Prior to taking office, I sat down with her and her entire team just to go over and during the transition. But we have to start holistically attacking these issues, and it comes to why crimes take place, why there were 344 murders in the city of Baltimore. But when you look at the fact that there were Baltimore's population, 24% of Baltimore's population is living in poverty, with 35% of children living below poverty, we have to start to address those issues. We have a program called Aim to Be More, which is modeled after Kamala Harris's Back on Track program, where we start to focus on those utilizing prosecutorial discretion for first-time nonviolent felony drug offenders. We know what ends up happening when these young people get felony convictions. They can no longer apply for a job, they can no longer apply for housing, they can't go back to school because they can't get any financial aid, and they have no other recourse but to go out doing what they were doing in the first place. That presents a public safety concern. So one in which, in the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office, we're now taking very seriously. This Aim to Be More, they go through this probationary period, they learn life skills, they learn job training skills, they do community service, and at the end of that probationary period, their felony records are wiped clean, and they're given a job. We have to start to address these issues holistically.
How do you, though, get police departments to understand that? Because what ends up happening is you as a DA, that can be your focus. This could be the DA's job, whether it was Craig Watkins in Dallas County, whether it's some other DA, but they're also running up against these cases that are coming to you, and you're looking at it and going, okay, why was this person arrested? Why was this person, coming through us? And so, how do you explain that to police officials that, look, you also need a culture shift?
Well, I can say that in Baltimore, what we're attempting to do is to work collaboratively with the police department. We can all remember a time when we had a rapport with the police department, right? We need to reestablish that. We have a program called the Junior State's Attorneys Program, where we take 30 students from across the city of Baltimore, and we've collaborated with the police department. You remember when there was officer friendly in your schools, right? You had a rapport. Well, we have to reestablish that, and that's what we're attempting to do in Baltimore City. So we take these 30 students in the summertime when there's not a lot for young people to do, and we have all this negative sort of imagery about what young people are doing. Well, 30 students this past summer spent 6 weeks with my office and the police department. They went from, the beginning of a case all the way to the end of a case. They went down to the Baltimore Police Department Evidence Control Room and the 911 call center and the Baltimore Police Department Foxtrot and the boat. And at the culmination of that 6 weeks, they had a mock trial competition at the University of Baltimore School of Law where they saw themselves in these roles and in these capacities. We have to be able to break down those barriers of distrust. And those are some of the ways in which you do it. You actually get involved, you get engaged. And it comes down a lot to training as well. A couple of years ago, then Attorney General Eric Holder, as well as Secretary of Education Arnie Duncan, released the results of what they defined as sort of this school-to-prison pipeline. They talked about the suspension rates that take place as well. As early as kindergarten, how there's a disproportionate impact on Black and Latino. What would you say needs to be done to impact and to change this school-to-prison pipeline? So, because you're sort of on the end, not the end, but it has to go through this long process before it actually gets to you. What do you say to the folks on the front end? On the front end, we have to invest in our children. And so when I talk about these initiatives, that's what we're attempting to do. We have to start investing in our children. And you're absolutely right. In one county in Maryland, there's a disproportionate impact. The Black children in this particular county are 7 times more likely to be suspended than the white children in this county. County. That's unacceptable. So when I say get to these children, we need programs and initiatives and partnerships and collaborations with the police department so that, like Great Expectations, where we've started in the state's attorney's office, where we're going into the school system and in the heart of West Baltimore where the unrest took place, right? And we're exposing these fourth graders to the positive aspects of the criminal justice system. We have to be able to get to these young people before they actually get to the criminal justice system. Because once they're there, I mean, there's really no turning back.
Is it also important to do what A.G. Holder did and make it clear to U.S. attorneys, look, your career advancement is not going to be predicated on how many folks you lock up?
Absolutely, and I started with that. The mission of a prosecutor is to seek justice over convictions.
When we talk about the school is one, but one of the other issues, let's say someone has committed a crime.
Mm-hmm.
They are sent to prison, but then when they come out, we have a society that pretty much says, look, as you said earlier, you can't go to school because you can't get, because of the 1994 crime bill, you can't apply for student aid, you can't live in public housing, it's very difficult to find a job. So our society essentially says one thing in terms of do right, get your life together, but what is required to do so, they can't access it.
Well, I mean, that's where you get support, and I think that's where we step up and we elect individuals that are going to represent our interests. You know, my husband, who's currently running for mayor in Baltimore City, one of the most progressive pieces of legislation in the country came out of Baltimore City and was pushed by him. Ban the box legislation, which, you know, is inclusive of private employers. They can no longer utilize, have you ever been convicted of a crime, to vet your application out. Now, in the city of Baltimore, even private employers, this was not before, this was for government employees, but not private employers. They now have to actually give you an opportunity to sell your skills, your qualifications. They can't do a background check until after they've given you a conditional offer of employment. And so that's the kind of leadership that we need in our city. That's what we need, I mean, all across the country. You're absolutely right. People deserve to have a second chance at redemption.
There are a lot of folks out there who may go to law school, who may, they look at glamorous positions, they look at being able to create wealth. What would you tell someone who wants to be a lawyer why they should consider being a prosecutor, being a district attorney?
Well, I think that when you look all across the country, we have 2.3 million men in prison. Over 70% of them are black or brown and incarcerated for nonviolent offenses. When we look at the prosecutors in this country, 95% of the prosecutors in this country are white. 79% are white males. There are 14 states with no prosecutors of color at all. As a woman and of color, I represent 1% of all elected prosecutors in this country. These are the individuals that are making a decision about who is going to be charged, what they're going to be charged with, what sentence their recommendation they're going to make. We need more of us on both sides of the fence. And I have to say that we have to utilize that discretion in ways that we can consider recidivism, and we can consider the young people and have an alternative to incarceration. So do we need more folks in public interest in, you know, in these fields and making a difference to change the trajectory of our future? Absolutely.
I was on a panel in Atlanta last year, and Ben Crump was on the panel. Of course, who is now president of the National Bar Association. And one of the things that we talked about, and we discussed it on this show as well, also deals with jury duty. And he said, black folks, y'all have no idea how I feel sitting here representing families who are pursuing civil cases against people, and I'm sitting there and I'm watching people who are black come up with every excuse possible to get out of jury duty. You also see it in terms of prosecuting. What do you say to our audience, for the most part African American, why we have to actually be on juries as opposed to trying to figure out how to get out of jury duty?
I think we have an obligation, we have a responsibility to our communities. At the end of the day, you know, you have these police officers, hardworking police officers that risk their life. The majority of police officers are not bad. They're risking their lives. They're going out here getting these individuals off our streets. You know, I have zealous prosecutors, one of the most zealous prosecutors in the country. You know, we can get out there, but we can't do our jobs. We can't make our communities safe unless until the community steps forward. And whether that's being a part and partaking in jury duty or coming forward, and we have this, mentality, this stop snitching mentality where we don't want to come forward, and our children are being slaughtered in every urban city across America because we don't want to come forward. We have an obligation to step forward and make our community safe, and I would implore people to not only serve on juries, but to come forward. And there's more of us than the individuals that define the negative perceptions of our communities.
You've mentioned stop snitching 2 or 3 different times, and I've made the case that the greatest no snitching policy exists in police departments. Not necessarily communities, but in police departments, and that is trying to get police officers to say when you see wrong, you need to say something. In New York, they actually instituted a new procedure there that if a police officer, first of all, they have to report all cases of where there's been physical contact, and even if you see it and you didn't participate, your job could be on the line if you don't report it. How do you also break down that wall to saying police officers, look, we get the blue wall, but you can't tell the community one thing and you do another?
Well, I think we're working on that. I think that's going to be a culture shift. But I also think that it's not just the police department, it's every profession. And, we can't really point fingers when in our communities, we're the ones that are being impacted the most. 344 people were killed in Baltimore City. And I can tell you 93% of them were Black. 88% were Black males. And so there's only a 31% clearance rate in Baltimore City. That's completely unacceptable. So as a community, we need to step forward. And so we can point fingers at other folks, but we need to start looking at ourselves and looking in the mirror as a community.
The last question, you mentioning the murder rate, how can a DA lower that?
So I think it's the ways in which we are. We're attempting to start to address those issues holistically. When you look at the Aim to Be More program, 98% of the participants, and we started as a pilot program, 98% of them are doing really well. I can tell you there was one individual who was homeless. There was one individual, he's not only homeless, but he didn't have a job. He didn't have anywhere to go. He's enrolled in college. We have to start to address these issues holistically, and if it's one person at a time, that's what we're going to do. Break down these barriers of distrust, and I know it's working because we have an almost 80% homicide conviction rate in Baltimore City. Despite the 31% clearance rate, we have an almost 81% homicide conviction rate, and I've been in office for 15 months.
All right, Marilyn Mosby, we appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Roland. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks a lot, folks.
All right, this woman has her act together. I wish her and her husband much success.